Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're exploring a question that starts with this really striking image, almost a century old, but connects right up to today's tech. So picture this, Petrograd, 1921, there's this huge poster, and what grabs you first is this massive blazing sun just filling the top half.
Yeah, it's incredibly dominant. And then
Yeah.
below it, you don't see like a leader giving a speech or anything. It's just ordinary people standing together, reading books, newspapers, just absorbed in text. It's very collective.
Exactly. And then there's the text on the poster itself. Big slogans.
Right at the top, proletarians of all countries unite.
Hmm.
You know, the classic call for workers everywhere to come together.
Mm.
And then right under that big sun image, glory to the sun, may the darkness vanish.
Powerful stuff. And then way down at the bottom, almost like fine print.
There's this little official-looking note. The Provincial Emergency Commission for the Elimination of Illiteracy.
So, okay, it's clearly about literacy, teaching everyone to read, not just, the elite few. But here's the puzzle that got us started on this deep dive. Why would a poster like that, one pushing for universal reading, make powerful people nervous? What's potentially dangerous about that idea?
That's a great question. And we're going to unpack it by following this author's journey, which interestingly starts with an AI.
An AI. Okay, tell me more.
So our source describes the author showing this old poster image to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT did its thing, translated the Russian perfectly. Proletarians of all countries unite. Glory of the sun, may the darkness vanish. All correct.
Okay, standard AI capability so far. What happened next?
Well then, according to the author, ChatGPT tacked on this label. This is an example of Soviet agitprop.
Agitprop. Huh, just like that.
Just like that. And the author sort of paused, thinking, hang on, why? It's just about reading, about learning, about pushing out darkness. And that unexpected label, that classification, was the spark for their whole investigation.
I can see why. So did ChatGPT explain why it called it agitprop?
It did, yeah. The author says its initial explanation was, well, very ChatGPT-like. Confident, a bit wordy. He talked about propaganda designed to promote political ideology, state-sponsored messaging, mobilizing mass support for revolutionary goals, that kind of thing.
Which I suppose isn't technically wrong in that historical context.
Exactly, the author acknowledges that, but they felt it was like overly serious or maybe too clinical for just a poster about learning to read. It felt like a definition, not really an insight into the poster's core message about literacy itself.
Right, it labeled it without really getting up the why behind the message itself being political, so the author pushed back.
Yes, they kept probing, asking this core question. Okay, but it's about literacy. Why is teaching people to read political? And this apparently led to this back and forth, almost like that 5 whys technique,
Yeah.
trying to get to the root cause.
Okay, so how did that dialogue unfold? What was the first why?
ChatGPT's response was, because literacy gives people information.
Simple enough. Information access. But is just having information inherently political? What came next?
The AI followed up with, because when people have information, they start asking questions.
Okay, information leads to questions, still feels pretty natural, almost like basic curiosity. Where does the politics come in?
Well, the next step was crucial. ChatGPT said, because when people ask questions, they sometimes notice things, like unfairness or injustice.
Okay. So it's not just asking, it's noticing. Seeing things in a new light, perhaps. Why is noticing injustice political?
The AI continued, because when people see injustice, they often want to change things.
Right. The desire for change. And the final piece, why is wanting change political?
This was the clincher. ChatGPT concluded, because there are people who benefit from how things are. And if things change, they might lose some of their power.
Wow. Okay. That lands differently.
It really does. And the author notes that this final point suddenly made that big, bright sun on the poster feel, well, not just friendly and enlightening, but potentially quite strong, even threatening to certain established interests.
That totally reframes it. And this isn't just historical analysis for the author, right? They connect this idea to their own life.
Very much so. They share this really powerful personal story about graduating high school in Southern California, but feeling functionally illiterate. They apparently got by on wit and hard work for years, only achieving what they called genuine literacy later on.
And that experience changed how they saw things.
Absolutely. It gave them, they say, a much sharper eye for how literacy is often controlled or limited, especially for learners who don't fit the standard mold, like neurodivergent or multilingual students.
So how does that personal insight connect back to the broader idea of literacy politics?
Well, the author argues that in many places, particularly the global north, what we call literacy often just means functional literacy. Just enough skill to follow workplace instructions, fill out forms, understand official notices, maybe consume some media.
Just enough to operate within the system, basically.
Precisely. The author puts it bluntly. Just enough to be managed.
But not enough for deeper engagement.
That's the core argument. This functional level is, according to the source, not enough to ask questions about the system itself, not enough for deep, critical, historical reading, certainly not enough for collective reading and understanding, and crucially, not enough to organize.
So the author's suggesting that what's often called a literacy crisis might not be just an unfortunate accident.
They go further, suggesting it's more like a managed state, a system perhaps unintentionally or maybe intentionally designed to produce functional compliance rather than genuine intellectual emancipation or collective power.
That's a strong claim, and contrasting that with the Soviet poster.
The contrast becomes really stark. That poster, the author argues, wasn't promising literacy just for economic efficiency or job skills. It was promising it for power, for collective knowing, for liberation from ignorance itself.
And that, the source claims, is the kind of mass enlightenment that still feels dangerous to systems built on managing information and people.
That's the connection they make. It leads into these metaphors they use, which I found quite vivid.
Okay, like what?
They describe the literacy in that Soviet poster as the sun. Think about it. Vast, shared, impossible to own or meter out. It shines on everyone equally.
Right. You can't really charge rent for sunlight, can you? Or decide who deserves the dawn.
Exactly. It's universal, non-negotiable. And that very universality, the author suggests, is what makes it unsettling if you want to maintain control. It's hard to manage a population that reads together, learns together, asks questions together. A population that, as they put it, sees the whole room.
Okay, so if that's the sun, what's the alternative metaphor used for the literacy often promoted in the global north?
The lamp. A much smaller, more contained light source. Think of a desk lamp.
Manageable, controllable.
Precisely. You can own it, you can sell it, you can decide who gets one. It's bright enough, the author says, for your own paperwork, maybe for a standardized test.
But limited in scope.
That's the point. It's not bright enough to illuminate the whole room, not bright enough to let you see how the room was built, or who holds the keys, or who's really profiting from the way things are set up.
And this lamp isn't freely given, is it?
No. The source emphasizes that the lamp is rented. It comes with conditions, often tied to fees, tuition, credentials, licenses, tests. The light is borrowed, and you can only use it critically, so long as you do not point it somewhere inconvenient.
Wow. That's a powerful contrast, the universal sun versus the conditional rented lamp.
It really highlights the difference in philosophy, doesn't it? One aims for total illumination, the other for controlled brightness.
And this brings us to the present day and technology. Where do large language models, LLMs, fit into this framework according to the author?
The author positions LLMs as the newest version of the lamp, the latest tool being brought in by powerful interests.
But not necessarily for the reasons often stated, like improving education for everyone.
Well, the author makes a very provocative claim here. They contend that LLMs aren't primarily being introduced to liberate students or empower teachers, but to replace us, meaning teachers.
Replace teachers? Why would that be the goal?
From the perspective of capital, as the author frames it, the advantages are stark. No more messy, unpredictable teachers. No more dealing with salaries, unions, pensions, or professionals who might actually think critically and challenge the system itself.
That's quite a cynical take on the push for AI in education. The source sees it mainly as a cost-cutting and control measure.
That's the argument presented, yes. It views LLMs not as neutral assistants, but as algorithms optimized to deliver instruction. And critically, they are scripted to reinforce the curriculum that serves capital.
So the idea is that they aren't neutral tools at all.
Not according to this source. The author stresses that LLMs are only as good as the data that train them, the prompts that guide them, and the limits that are programmed into them. The built-in guardrails, they argue, are not built for liberation. They are built for safety for the system.
Which loops right back to that original poster's simple, powerful message.
Exactly. Glory to literacy. May ignorance vanish. A call for universal, unfettered understanding.
So thinking back to ChatGPT calling the poster agitprop, Maybe it is agitprop in a way.
Perhaps, but the author reframes it.
Oh.
Maybe it's agitprop not because it's inherently sinister, but because it agitates for something truly unsettling to the current power structures.
Which is?
The idea that we might learn together, that we might read together, that we might see together.
And the ultimate threat implied there is.
That in doing so, we might no longer need their lamps.
That really makes you think about the systems we have now. The source mentions things like the science of reading, certified methods, credentials, data dashboards.
Yes, the author points to all these as examples, perhaps, of carefully managed, monetized systems, like 1,000 tiny lights, keeping the educational machine running.
Lights that illuminate specific tasks or metrics.
But the author concludes, they're never so bright as to let us see who built the machine.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to mull over. If much of our learning is guided by these controlled lamps, designed for specific functions within the current system, what actually happens if we, collectively, decide we'd rather turn on the sun?